February 1935, Harlem. One thief stole $12,000 and thought distance would save him. By the end of dinner, one man walked free and another was erased from the streets. This wasn't anger or mercy, but a lesson written in silence. One boss chose strategy over blood. So what did Bumpy Johnson do that night at table 7? To understand it, the story goes back to the moment the food went cold. February 1935. Tuesday night. 8:10 in the evening. A small restaurant on West 126th Street in Harlem held 12 tables and one man who understood he might not leave breathing. The restaurant smelled like cheap cooking oil and cheaper decisions. Chipped plates sat on tables covered with stained cloth. Yellow bulbs hung from the ceiling, casting light that made everything look sick. The menu had no prices because if you needed to ask, you were in the wrong establishment. A jukebox in the corner played Duke Ellington. Mood indigo drifted through cigarette smoke like a needle tracing grooves in vinyl. The sound was elegant and cold. Eddie Caruso sat at table 7 eating pork ribs that had gone cold 20 minutes ago. His hands shook, but he kept chewing because stopping meant acknowledging what was coming. Across from him, Bumpy Johnson sat perfectly still. He did not check his watch. He did not order food. He simply placed silence on the table between them like a loaded weapon. The waiter approached nervously. "Mr. Johnson, can I get you something?" "Coffee," Bumpy said without looking at the man. "Black. No sugar." The waiter hurried away. Eddie tried to swallow, but the meat stuck in his throat. He reached for his water glass and nearly knocked it over. Bumpy watched this with the expression of a man observing an insect trapped under glass. "You should eat slower," Bumpy said quietly. "A man chokes when he eats too fast. Terrible way to go." Eddie set down his fork. His voice came out hoarse. "Mr. Johnson, I can explain." "Can you?" Bumpy leaned back in his chair. "That would be interesting. Because from where I sit, there is not much to explain. $12,000 disappeared 3 nights ago from a collection point you controlled. That money was supposed to reach me by Thursday morning. It did not. Instead, I hear whispers that you are looking to sell your route to a crew downtown. So please, explain how that makes sense." Eddie's mouth opened, but no words came out. Sweat ran down his temples, despite the cold February air coming through gaps in the door. "I thought so," Bumpy said. He looked around the restaurant slowly like a landlord inspecting property. "You know what I like about this place. It is honest. The food is cheap. The plates are cracked. Nobody pretends this is anything other than what it is. I respect that kind of honesty." The waiter returned with coffee and set it down carefully. Bumpy did not touch it. He let the steam rise between them like a curtain neither man could see through clearly. "Do you know why you are still alive right now?" Bumpy asked. Eddie shook his head. "Because I want to understand something," Bumpy continued. "You have worked for me for 6 years. You have always been reliable. Your wife Maria is a good woman. Your son Tony goes to school and stays out of trouble. So why would a man with a family and a future decide to steal $12,000 and run?" "I was desperate," Eddie whispered. "We needed the money. Everyone needs money. That is not an answer. That is an excuse." Eddie's jaw clenched. "Frankie said it would work. He said the distance would protect us. He said you would not chase it downtown." Bumpy's expression did not change, but something shifted in his eyes. "Frankie Russo told you this?" "Yes." "And you believed him?" "He has connections. He said he could arrange everything." Bumpy picked up his coffee cup and took a slow sip. He set it down with precision. "Eddie, do you know what the most dangerous thing in Harlem is? It is not a gun or a knife or a man with a temper. It is a man who sells hope to people who cannot afford it. Frankie Russo specializes in making promises he has no intention of keeping. He said we would be safe. He lied. Bumpy's voice stayed calm, but each word landed like a hammer on stone. You were never going to make it downtown. You were never going to sell that route. Frankie was going to take your $12,000, disappear, and leave you to face me alone. Did he mention that part of the plan? Eddie's face went pale. No, of course not. Because Frankie does not solve problems. He creates them and then sells the solution. And you bought what he was selling without asking the price. The jukebox switched songs. Solitude filled the room. Outside, a car door slammed. Footsteps approached on the sidewalk. Eddie's head jerked toward the sound. Bumpy did not move. That will be Frankie, Bumpy said. I invited him to join us. I thought it would be educational for both of you to have this conversation together. Eddie's breathing accelerated. Mr. Johnson, please, I have a family. I know you do. That is the only reason you are still sitting here instead of floating in the East River. Bumpy leaned forward slightly. But your family does not change the fact that you stole from me. It does not erase the debt. It only complicates the payment. What do you want from me? I want you to finish your meal, Bumpy said. I want you to sit there and eat every bite on that plate. Because in a few minutes, Frankie is going to walk through that door. And when he does, you are going to have to make a choice that determines whether you walk out of here breathing or get carried out in pieces. Eddie stared at the cold ribs. His stomach turned, but he picked up his fork with trembling hands. He forced himself to chew and swallow while Bumpy watched without expression. The door opened. Cold air rushed in along with the sound of traffic and distant voices. A man entered wearing an expensive coat and a smile that did not reach his eyes. Frankie Russo looked around the restaurant until his gaze landed on table 7. The smile froze on his face when he saw Bumpy sitting across from Eddie. Frankie's stride faltered for half a step. Then he recovered and walked toward them with manufactured confidence. Mr. Johnson, I did not expect to see you here tonight. Sit down, Frankie, Bumpy said without looking up. We have things to discuss. Frankie glanced at Eddie, who was staring at his plate like it might contain instructions for survival. Frankie pulled out the empty chair and sat down slowly. He kept his hands visible on the table. His smile had completely disappeared. What things? Frankie asked carefully. Bumpy finally looked at him. $12,000. A stolen route. A plan that was never going to work. And 2 men who thought they could steal from me and disappear before I noticed. He paused. Does that cover it, or should I be more specific? Frankie's throat worked. There must be some misunderstanding. There is no misunderstanding. There is only a debt and a decision about how it gets paid. Bumpy's voice stayed quiet, but every word carried absolute certainty. Eddie already told me about your promises, about the distance and the protection and the new life downtown. All very convincing, all complete fiction. Eddie is confused, Frankie said quickly. He misunderstood what I said. Bumpy looked at Eddie. Did you misunderstand? Eddie shook his head without speaking. Interesting, Bumpy said. He turned back to Frankie. So either Eddie is lying or you are lying. One of you is telling the truth, and one of you is trying to save yourself by sacrificing the other. The question is, which one of you I should believe? The restaurant had gone completely silent. Even the jukebox seemed quieter. Every person in the room understood that something was happening at table 7, something that would be discussed in whispers for months. Bumpy pushed his coffee cup aside. Here is what we are going to do. The 3 of us are going to sit here and have a conversation, a very honest conversation. And at the end of that conversation, one of you is going to walk out of here. The other one is not. Which one survives depends entirely on what happens in the next few minutes. Eddie's fork clattered onto his plate. Frankie's hands curled into fists on the table. Bumpy waited patiently for one of them to speak first. The countdown had begun. The door was closed. And every choice either man thought they controlled now belonged to Bumpy Johnson alone. Bumpy let the silence stretch until Eddie's breathing sounded like a dying engine. Then he spoke without raising his voice above a whisper. "You are not going to die tonight." Eddie's entire body went slack. His shoulders dropped, his hands unclenched. Relief flooded his face like he had just been pulled from drowning. But Bumpy was not finished. "Someone else will." The relief vanished. Eddie's eyes went wide. In Harlem, being spared meant you owed a debt that grew heavier every day. Men who got forgiven ended up wishing they had taken the bullet instead. Because bullets were fast. Debt was slow. Debt followed you home. Debt watched your family sleep. Bumpy looked around the restaurant like a landlord counting his property. His gaze moved from the waiter standing frozen near the kitchen to the man in the gray coat sitting by the door reading yesterday's newspaper. Another man sat at the bar nursing a drink that never got emptier. Every person in the room understood their role. Every person had been placed there before Eddie arrived. "I like this place," Bumpy said. "The owner pays on time. He understands that protection is not charity. He knows that when I say the inspector will not find violations, the inspector finds nothing. He knows that when I say his customers eat in peace, they eat in peace." He paused. "He learned these things because I taught him, the same way I taught you." Eddie nodded. His hands pressed flat against the table like he was trying to hold himself down. Bumpy finally looked at Frankie. He studied him the way a butcher studies meat before deciding where to make the first cut. Frankie tried to hold the stare, but sweat started running down his neck into his expensive collar. "Frankie Russo." Bumpy said the name like he was reading a death certificate. 28 years old. You sell promises. You wear suits you cannot afford. You convince desperate men that you have connections you do not have. You think being clever makes you dangerous. It does not. It makes you reckless. "Mr. Johnson, there has been a misunderstanding," Frankie started. Bumpy raised one finger. Just one. Frankie's mouth snapped shut so fast his teeth clicked together. "I am going to ask Eddie one question," Bumpy said. "His answer decides who walks out of here and who gets carried out in a trunk. So both of you listen carefully." Eddie's breathing got faster. His eyes bounced between Bumpy and Frankie like a rabbit caught between two wolves. Bumpy leaned forward. His voice dropped lower. "Eddie, who told you that stealing $12,000 from me was a good idea? Who promised you that running downtown would keep you safe? Who convinced you that I would not find you?" The question landed like a fist to the throat. Eddie could not breathe, could not think. Frankie's hands disappeared under the table. Eddie saw this and his stomach turned to ice. "Answer very carefully," Bumpy continued, "because the wrong answer means Maria becomes a widow and Tony grows up without a father. The right answer means you walk home tonight and tuck your son into bed. So think about who you trust more, me or Frankie." Eddie looked at Frankie. Their eyes met. Frankie's face said, "We are partners." But his hands stayed hidden under the table where they could be reaching for something Eddie could not see. Frankie's eyes said, "Keep quiet," but his body language said, "Save yourself." Eddie turned back to Bumpy. His voice came out rough. "Frankie told me it would work. He said you would not chase $12,000 across Manhattan. He said the distance would protect us. He said he had connections downtown who would cover us." Frankie's face flushed red from his collar to his hairline. "You are twisting what I said. I was giving you advice, not making promises." "Then explain," Bumpy said without looking at him. "Tell Eddie and me exactly what you said. Use your exact words. Because right now Eddie is saying you promised him safety, and you are saying you gave him advice. One of you is lying, and the liar is going to leave here in pieces." Frankie opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Whatever smooth words he had prepared evaporated under Bumpy's stare. The restaurant had gone so silent that the ice melting in someone's glass sounded like cracking bone. The waiter appeared at table 7. He refilled Eddie's water without asking. He placed a fresh napkin next to Frankie's hand. As he did this, he locked eyes with Bumpy for exactly 1 second. Bumpy nodded once. The waiter disappeared back into the kitchen. That tiny exchange told Eddie everything. The waiter was not serving. He was reporting. The man by the door was not reading. He was guarding. The customer at the bar was not drinking. He was watching. Bumpy had not walked into a meeting. He had built a cage and invited them inside before they knew the door would lock. "You see, Frankie," Bumpy said like they were discussing the weather. "The problem with selling hope is that people eventually realize they bought poison, and when they realize it, they want someone to bleed for it. Right now, Eddie is deciding if he should blame himself for being stupid or blame you for being a liar. Which do you think he picks?" Frankie's hands came back above the table. They were empty and shaking like he had palsy. "We can work this out. Nobody needs to die. We can pay you back. We can make this right." "You are correct," Bumpy said. "Nobody needs to die. But somebody will die because $12,000 is missing, and I do not forgive theft. The only question is whose neck I break. Yours or Eddie's." He looked at Eddie. "This is the man you trusted. This is the man who promised to protect your family. Look at his hands. Look at the sweat pouring down his face. Look at how his eyes keep moving toward the door like he is measuring the distance. Does he look like someone who can save you?" Eddie looked at Frankie and saw him clearly. Not the operator with plans and connections, just a frightened man in a stolen suit realizing that words would not stop what was coming. "No," Eddie said. "Good V," Bumpy replied. "Now we stop pretending. Now we talk about payment. And payment is always in blood or money. You choose which." Frankie's throat worked. He tried to speak, but his voice cracked. "How much money?" "All of it," Bumpy said. 12,000 that Eddie stole. Plus 12,000 in interest for wasting my time. Plus whatever Eddie owes for thinking he could run. That is your bill, Frankie. $25,000. You have until tomorrow night to deliver it. If you are $1 short, I will break every finger in your right hand with a ball-peen hammer. If you are 1 hour late, I will cut off your left ear and mail it to your mother. If you run, I will find you and I will bury you where nobody will ever find the body. Do you understand the terms?" Frankie's face had gone the color of old newspaper. "I do not have that kind of money." "Then you should start finding it," Bumpy said, "because the clock is already running, and when the time runs out, so does your luck." He stood up slowly. The chair scraped across the floor like nails on a coffin lid. He looked down at both men. "Eddie stays here. Frankie leaves now. You have 24 hours. If I see you before then without my money, you will not see anything ever again." The man in the gray coat by the door stood up and opened it. Cold air rushed in. Frankie looked at Eddie one last time. Eddie looked away. Frankie stood on shaking legs and walked toward the exit. He did not run. Running would have been worse. The door closed behind him. The man in the gray coat sat back down with his newspaper. Bumpy remained standing over Eddie. "Now," Bumpy said quietly, "let us discuss what you owe me, and how you are going to pay it." Frankie had left, but the door stayed locked. The man in the gray coat remained by the exit like a piece of furniture that breathed. Bumpy sat back down across from Eddie. He let the silence do the work that threats could not accomplish. "Tell me something, Eddie," Bumpy said. "When Frankie promised you that running downtown would keep you safe, did you believe him because you thought he was smart, or because you wanted someone to save you from the mess you made?" Eddie's throat was too dry. He drank half his water before answering. "I wanted to believe him." "Honest answer. That keeps you breathing." Bumpy leaned forward. "So when did Frankie first suggest stealing from me?" Eddie's eyes widened. "How did you know he suggested it?" Because men like Frankie do not wait for opportunities. They create them. They find desperate people and plant ideas like seeds. Then they water those ideas with promises until the desperate person thinks the idea was theirs. Bumpy's voice stayed level. When did he first suggest it? 6 weeks ago. We were drinking at a bar on Lenox. He asked how much I was making. I told him. He said I was being underpaid. He said crews downtown would pay better and ask fewer questions. And you listened. Maria's mother is sick. Medical bills are piling up. Tony needs shoes. The rent went up. I was drowning and Frankie threw me a rope. Bumpy reached into his coat. Eddie flinched, expecting a gun. Instead, Bumpy pulled out a small leather notebook worn smooth from years of handling. He placed it on the table like evidence in court. Do you know what this is? Eddie shook his head. This is a record of every conversation Frankie Russo has had that I considered worth remembering. Every promise. Every lie. Every desperate man he convinced to ruin themselves. Bumpy opened it to a page marked with red ribbon. February 2nd, Lenox Lounge. Frankie Russo meets Eddie Caruso. Discussion about route profitability and downtown opportunities. Frankie buys 4 drinks. Eddie pays for none. 90 minutes. Eddie stared at the handwritten notes like they were carved on his tombstone. You knew the whole time. I know everything that happens in Harlem. I know when people plan to steal from me before they finish planning. I keep records of men who think they are invisible, and when the time comes to collect, I have documentation that cannot be argued with. From the next table, the smell of wine drifted over. Someone had ordered Barolo from 1934. The scent was rich and bitter, expensive and aged. The kind that cost more than Eddie made in a month. The kind that tasted like regret. Bumpy closed the notebook but left it on the table. You owe me $12,000. You do not have it. Your route generates maybe $300 per week after my percentage. At that rate, it would take nearly a year to pay back what you stole. And that assumes you eat nothing, pay no rent, and your family survives on air. Eddie's breathing got shallow. I know. So the question is not whether you can pay me back. The question is how. Bumpy paused. And that is where Frankie becomes useful again. Eddie looked confused. You told him to bring $25,000 by tomorrow night. I did. And he will try. He will call in every favor. He will threaten everyone he thinks owes him something. He will steal from others to pay me. And when he shows up tomorrow with whatever he scrapes together, I will take it. Then give him a new deadline for the rest. Bumpy smiled without warmth. But that is Frankie's problem. Right now we are discussing yours. What do you want from me? I want you to understand something clearly. You do not have $12,000, but Frankie does. Or will. The reason Frankie is scrambling to find money is because he knows if he does not pay, I will come for him. Not with a gun. With something worse. With information about every illegal thing he has done. Evidence that will send him to prison for 10 years or get him killed by people more dangerous than me. Eddie was starting to understand, but could not fully grasp where this was going. You want me to help collect from Frankie? No, I want you to answer one question. Your answer determines whether you walk out with a future or a funeral. The restaurant grew colder. The jukebox had gone silent. Even kitchen sounds stopped. Bumpy's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Eddie, how much is your life worth to Frankie Russo? Not in words, not in promises, in actual money, because that is what I am asking him to pay. Not my debt. Your debt. $12,000 for your life. The question is whether Frankie values you enough to pay it. Eddie's face went pale. He does not have that kind of loyalty. Then you have a problem, because I am going to give Frankie a choice. He can pay $12,000 to save you, or walk away and let me handle you the way I handle thieves. When a man like Frankie has to choose between money and loyalty, what do you think he chooses? Eddie did not answer because he already knew. Frankie would choose money. Always. Bumpy pulled out his pocket watch and checked the time. It is 8:45. Frankie has until 9 tomorrow night to bring 25,000. But before that, I am going to make him a different offer. I will tell him he can reduce his debt by 12,000 if he abandons you completely. If he walks away and lets you face consequences alone. Eddie's hands shook uncontrollably. Why are you doing this? Because I do not just punish theft. I punish betrayal. I want Frankie to betray you in front of me, so when I am finished with him, he understands that every friend he ever had was purchased with lies. And when those lies run out, so does the friendship. Bumpy stood slowly. 5 minutes. That is how long Frankie gets tomorrow to decide whether he pays for your life or buys his own freedom. And you get to watch him make that choice. The countdown had accelerated. 5 minutes for Frankie to choose between money and mask. 5 minutes for Eddie to understand that his life had a price, and Frankie was not willing to pay it. Bumpy stood and walked 3 steps away from the table. He turned his back on both men and faced the jukebox as though the conversation no longer interested him. This was not carelessness. This was confidence. He already knew how the next 5 minutes would play out. You two should talk, Bumpy said without turning around. Discuss your options. Decide what happens next. I'm going to select another song. When it finishes playing, I will return. And when I return, one of you will have made a decision that saves you. The other will have made a decision that buries you. He dropped a coin into the jukebox. Duke Ellington started playing in a sentimental mood. The song would last approximately 4 minutes and 30 seconds. The countdown had a soundtrack now. Frankie leaned across the table immediately. His voice dropped to a harsh whisper that barely reached Eddie's ears. Listen to me very carefully. If we pay him anything, he owns us forever. He will bleed us dry. Every week he will come back for more. This never ends unless we end it. Eddie's hands were shaking so badly he had to grip the edge of the table to keep them still. What are you suggesting? I am suggesting we do not have to sit here and take this. There are ways out. There are always ways out if you have the nerve to take them. He has men at every exit. He has been planning this since before we arrived. There is no way out. Frankie's eyes darted toward the kitchen hallway. There is a service exit through the kitchen. It leads to an alley. If we create a distraction, we can move before his men react. Knock over a table, break some glasses. In the confusion we run. Eddie stared at him. You want to run from Bumpy Johnson in his own restaurant with his own men watching every door. I want to survive. And survival means not sitting here waiting for him to decide our fate. Frankie's voice took on the tone of a salesman closing a deal. Think about it. We go out the kitchen. We disappear into Harlem. By the time he organizes a search, we are already downtown. We use the connections I told you about. We vanish. Those connections do not exist, Eddie said flatly. You lied about them. You lied about everything. I did not lie. I exaggerated. There is a difference. Frankie's hand moved slightly toward his coat. Eddie, I came prepared for this conversation to go badly. I brought insurance. If Bumpy tries to stop us, I have a way to make him reconsider. Eddie's stomach turned to ice. You brought a gun into a meeting with Bumpy Johnson. I brought protection. And right now, that protection is the only thing standing between us and whatever he has planned. Frankie's hand was inside his coat now, his fingers wrapped around something Eddie could not see. So you need to decide right now. Do you trust me enough to run, or do you trust him enough to stay? Eddie looked at Frankie's hand inside his coat. He looked at Frankie's eyes. And in that moment, Eddie understood something with perfect clarity. Frankie was not asking permission to save both of them. Frankie was asking permission to use Eddie as a distraction while he escaped alone. You are not going to help me, Eddie whispered. "You are going to shoot me and run while Bumpy's men deal with my body." Frankie's face went cold. All pretense of partnership vanished like smoke. "Then you die here for nothing. Because I am not staying to watch Bumpy break you into pieces. Frankie, keep your hands where I can see them." Bumpy had not turned around. He was still facing the jukebox, but his voice cut through the restaurant like a blade through silk. Frankie's hand froze inside his coat. Every person in the room shifted slightly. The man in the gray coat stood up. The customer at the bar set down his glass. The waiter stepped out of the kitchen holding something heavy wrapped in a towel. "Take your hand out of your coat slowly," Bumpy continued in the same calm tone. "If I see a weapon, you will not leave this building in one piece. If I see your hand empty, you get to keep breathing for another 60 seconds. Choose." Frankie's hand emerged slowly. It was empty. His face had gone the color of old newspaper. Sweat poured down his temples into his collar. Bumpy turned around. He walked back to the table and sat down in the same chair he had vacated. He looked at Frankie with the expression of a teacher disappointed in a particularly stupid student. "You brought a gun to a negotiation. That shows remarkably poor judgment. It also shows me exactly what kind of man you are." Bumpy's voice stayed quiet, but somehow filled the entire space. "You were going to shoot Eddie and run through the kitchen. You were going to sacrifice him to buy yourself 30 seconds of escape. And you thought I would not anticipate that because you think I am stupid enough to turn my back on an armed man without preparation." Frankie said nothing. There was nothing to say. Bumpy looked at Eddie. "Now you know. Now you understand what his friendship costs. He was willing to put a bullet in you to save himself. So I will ask you one more time. Do you trust this man?" "No," Eddie said. "Good." Bumpy turned back to Frankie. "Stand up. Walk to the door. The man in the gray coat is going to accompany you outside. You are going to give him the gun you thought I did not know about. Then you are going to leave, and you are going to find $25,000 by tomorrow night. If you come back here without that money, I will do to you what you were planning to do to Eddie. Except I will make it last longer and hurt more. Do you understand?" Frankie stood on legs that barely supported him. "I understand." "Then go. Your time is running out." Frankie walked toward the exit like a man walking toward his own execution. The man in the gray coat fell into step behind him. The door opened. Cold air rushed in. Then it closed and Frankie was gone. Bumpy sat alone with Eddie. The jukebox was still playing. The song had not finished yet. There was still time left on the countdown. "Now," Bumpy said quietly, "let us discuss what you owe me and how you are going to pay it without ending up like Frankie." "Wait. Go back. Rewind to the moment Frankie's hand emerged from his coat. The moment Bumpy said it was empty. That was a lie. The hand was not empty. It held a gun. Frankie had not given up. He had been waiting. And when Bumpy turned his attention to Eddie, Frankie saw his opening. He pulled the gun fully from his coat and aimed it at Bumpy's chest. His hand shook, but the barrel stayed pointed at center mass. 7 feet of distance, impossible to miss. "Nobody moves," Frankie said. His voice cracked, but the gun did not waver. "Eddie, stand up. We are leaving. Right now." Eddie did not move. He sat frozen at the table, staring at the gun like it was a snake that might strike in any direction. The man in the gray coat started to reach inside his jacket. Frankie swung the gun toward him. "Do not. I will put a hole in you before your hand touches whatever you are reaching for." The man in the gray coat stopped moving. His hands went visible on the table in front of him. The waiter in the kitchen doorway did the same. The customer at the bar remained perfectly still. Everyone understood that sudden movements got people killed. Frankie turned the gun back to Bumpy. "You thought you had me. You thought you controlled everything. But you forgot that desperate men do desperate things. And I am very desperate right now." Bumpy's expression did not change. He sat with his hands relaxed on the table. No fear. No surprise. Just patience. "Are you going to shoot me, Frankie?" "If you make me." "Then do it. Pull the trigger. See what happens." Frankie's finger tightened on the trigger. The mechanism started to move. The hammer began to pull back. Then Frankie squeezed. Click. The sound was small and final. The sound of metal hitting metal with nothing in between. The sound of a firing pin striking an empty chamber. Frankie's face went blank with confusion. He pulled the trigger again. Click. His eyes dropped to the gun in his hand like it had betrayed him personally. He pulled the trigger a third time with the same result. Click. 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 5 times. 6 times. The gun made the same empty sound each time. The sound of a plan collapsing. The sound of hope dying. Bumpy stood slowly. He walked around the table toward Frankie with the casual stride of a man who had never been in danger at any point during the conversation. Frankie backed up until his spine hit the wall. He was still pulling the trigger, still hearing that same dead click. "You bought that gun 3 weeks ago," Bumpy said quietly. "From a man named Raymond who operates out of a pawn shop on Lenox. Raymond is someone I do business with regularly. So when you came to him looking for a weapon, he called me before you left his shop. I told him to sell you exactly what you wanted, and I told him to make sure it never had any ammunition in it." Frankie stared at the gun, then at Bumpy, then back at the gun. His entire body started shaking. "That weapon was never loaded," Bumpy continued. "Every plan you made, every escape route you imagined, every scenario where you pulled that trigger and walked out of here alive, all of it was built on a foundation that never existed. You were holding an empty threat the entire time, and you never bothered to check." Frankie's legs gave out. He slid down the wall until he was sitting on the floor with the useless gun still in his hand. His face had gone gray. His breathing came in short gasps. Bumpy looked down at him with something approaching pity. "You lost the moment you thought you could plan against me. You lost when you trusted Raymond. You lost when you brought a gun you never verified to a meeting with a man who controls every weapon sold in Harlem." He turned to Eddie, who was still sitting at the table watching this unfold with wide eyes. "You told me the truth. You could have lied to protect Frankie. You could have stayed loyal to the man who was planning to shoot you and run, but you did not. And that choice is the only reason you are still breathing." Eddie's voice came out hoarse. "I almost went with him. I almost believed we could run. But you did not. That is what matters. That is what keeps you alive." Bumpy looked back at Frankie. "You were willing to kill someone to save yourself. That is what ends you." The man in the gray coat and another man Eddie had not noticed before grabbed Frankie under both arms and hauled him to his feet. Frankie tried to struggle, but his body would not cooperate. The gun fell from his hand and clattered on the floor. Nobody picked it up. It was worthless now. It had always been worthless. They dragged Frankie toward the door. His feet scraped against the floor, leaving marks. Before they pushed him outside, Frankie found his voice one last time. He looked back at Bumpy with pure hatred burning in his eyes. "You do not know what you just agreed to," Frankie said through clenched teeth. "You think this ends here. It does not. You just made an enemy you cannot afford." Bumpy smiled without warmth. "I made an example. There is a difference." The door opened. They threw Frankie into the street. The door closed. The lock clicked. The restaurant returned to its previous quiet. The jukebox was still playing. Duke Ellington filled the silence. Bumpy sat back down across from Eddie. He picked up his coffee cup and took a slow sip. The coffee had gone cold, but he drank it anyway. "Now," he said calmly, "let us discuss your future, because Frankie no longer has one." Eddie left the restaurant at 9:37. He walked. He did not run. Running meant weakness. Running meant Bumpy's men would chase him down and break his legs in an alley where nobody would hear him scream. He walked 6 blocks to his apartment. His hands were steady, but his mind kept replaying the sound. Click, click, click. The sound of Frankie pulling a trigger that would never fire. The sound of a plan built on sand. Maria met him at the door. She wrapped her arms around him in the darkness and held him without asking questions. In Harlem, asking questions was suicide. You did not ask where your husband went. You did not ask why he came home late smelling like fear and cigarette smoke. Eddie did not sleep that night. Every sound became punctuation for his fear. Footsteps above. A car door closing, the building settling. Each noise made him flinch and reach for Maria to make sure she was still breathing. Morning came. Eddie returned to his route on Lenox Avenue. The numbers game operated the same as always. But something had changed. People looked at him longer than they used to. Their eyes held a question they would never voice. What happened at Table 7? Frankie Russo disappeared from Harlem like a name that had been forbidden. No body turned up. No obituary appeared. No funeral was held. He simply stopped existing. People stopped saying his name. Businesses forgot he ever drank there. Frankie became a ghost. Nobody mourned because mourning meant acknowledging he existed. 3 days after Table 7, Eddie received a message to meet Illinois Gordon. Illinois was Bumpy's lawyer. He handled arrangements that needed documentation but could never appear in court. "You are being transferred," Illinois said without preamble. "New route, better territory. Same percentage to Bumpy, but higher volume. Your family will be protected. Medical bills for Maria's mother will be handled. Tony's school tuition paid through graduation." Eddie's throat tightened. What does he want in return? Loyalty, honesty, and understanding that survival is not the end of your debt. It is the beginning of a contract you never signed but will honor until one of you stops breathing. Eddie nodded. He had traded one prison for another. But this prison came with salary and the promise that his son would not grow up fatherless. Bumpy Johnson never fired a shot that night, but the entire neighborhood adjusted anyway. Debts got paid faster. Fraud decreased. Collections became more accurate. People remembered Table 7 like a new standard had been established. Steal and face consequences. Betray and disappear. Tell the truth and survive. Stories like this live through whispers and empty spaces. People remember results more clearly than process. The empty spaces are what make Harlem afraid. Nobody knows exactly what happened to Frankie. Nobody knows the precise terms of Eddie's arrangement. The uncertainty breeds caution. The caution breeds order. Eddie learned the price of survival. Every week he collected money for Bumpy. Every week he paid his percentage. Every week he went home to Maria and Tony and pretended his life was his own. But he knew the truth. His life belonged to Bumpy Johnson now. That ownership would last until one of them stopped breathing, or until Eddie made another mistake that could not be forgiven. Real power does not come from violence. It comes from intelligence, from the ability to make your opponent reveal themselves before they can draw their weapon, from knowing the gun in their hand has no bullets before they know it themselves, from building cages so perfect that prisoners walk into them voluntarily and lock the doors from inside. Harlem did not need posted rules. It only needed one story passed mouth to mouth in bars and barbershops and street corners. There are dinners that never end. They just change location. Table 7 is everywhere. And Bumpy Johnson is always watching, always waiting, always 3 steps ahead of whatever plan you think will save you. That is the new order. That is the lesson written in Frankie's disappearance and Eddie's survival. And that lesson will be remembered long after everyone who sat at that table has turned to dust. Table 7 teaches something most people learn too late. When someone promises you an easy escape from consequences, they are not offering rescue. They are offering to use you as a distraction while they save themselves. Eddie survived because he chose truth over loyalty to a liar. Frankie died because he brought a weapon he never verified. In business relationships and crisis, always verify what you are trusting your life to. Check the gun. Confirm the exit exists. Understand that people who sell hope without cost are selling poison. This story examines strategic thinking within historical organized crime context for educational purposes only. We don't endorse illegal activity. We study how power operates when conventional rules don't apply. Thank you for staying until the end. If this analysis resonated with you, subscribe for more untold stories where intelligence defeats force.